people appeared to come through unscathed, there's widespread concern that the quake caused structural damages that may not be evident for years. Tonight, the only structures that seem to inspire complete confidence here are the centuries-old pyramids, which survived the quake without a scratch. Mark Litke, ABC News, Cairo.
Still overseas in Tokyo today, the Japanese government announced that the country's crime rate has jumped to its highest level since World War II. An increase in robberies and burglaries is apparently responsible. Murder in Japan has actually gone down. But there is very active concern this may not continue to be the case because the number of guns is going up. Guns from the USA. Here's ABC's Bill Rediker.
A right-wing extremist tries to assassinate a politician. A drug addict is arrested after killing a cop. A national crackdown on Yakuza, Japan's organized crime gangs, nets hundreds of weapons. Japan's reputation as one of the safest countries in the world is changing, and it is handguns, many of them smuggled from America, that are being blamed.
I think Japan would become more dangerous place.
The guns arrive by sea and by air, buried in cargo containers, hidden in personal effects. During the past year, the number of confiscated guns has grown by more than 20%, and increasingly the owners are ordinary Japanese.
Until now, nearly all of the guns we captured belonged to gangs, but this year, 25% were found on citizens.
That's because the crackdown on organized crime here convinced many gang members to get rid of some of their guns, and they did it by selling them to ordinary citizens. Police also blame the U.S. recession. They say American gun traffickers have been forced to look overseas for business. In Japan, selling guns can be extremely lucrative.
This Colt 45 sells for about $330 in America. Here it sells for $6,500.
It is not fear of crime that makes Japanese want to arm themselves. They are fascinated with guns, even model guns, because firearms are strictly forbidden in Japan. So when Japanese go on vacation, many of them visit shooting ranges. 90% of the customers at this Honolulu range are Japanese. Police fear that when the tourists come home, they may want to buy a gun.
Very nice.
Oh, I'm very happy. It's kind of like an addiction. Once they shoot, they can't stop.
Until the Japanese government finds a way to stop the gun smuggling, Japanese police are increasing the number of coastal patrols and tightening security around government leaders. Police admit that only a year ago, they were more worried about Japanese swords and knives than American guns. Bill Rediker, ABC News, Tokyo.
News today about a young boy from Sarajevo we saw on this broadcast a few weeks ago, 8-year-old Sasha Lopar, who was hit in the head by flying shrapnel while he was outside playing, was operated on yesterday in Geneva. Doctors today say he seems to be doing fine. He has no brain damage. We learned today that one of our former colleagues had died, Hughes Rudd, who was a familiar correspondent at CBS for 20 years before coming to ABC in 1979. He died in France, where he lived. He was 71. Over the course of his career, he established himself not only as a fine reporter, but a man blessed with a sense of humor. He also had an eye for an unusual story. We'll be back in a moment.
I'd let you drive the Camry, but you know nothing about it.
Multi-valve engine, high tensile steel construction, available ABS, driver's side airbag is standard.
You know nothing about
ergonomics, panoramic cockpit, contoured seats, room for 5.
You don't have your glasses.
Contacts.
You're left-handed.
Uh-huh.
The 1993 Toyota Camry. Few cars actually move you. This is one.
Now at Red Lobster.
Well, we've got a new special tonight. It's got everything. Petite lobster and 2 kinds of shrimp for just $10.99.
Start with petite lobster tails, sweet and delicious. Add our savory scampi. Then our famous grilled shrimp to top off a terrific dinner.
It's new.
It's petite lobster and shrimp 2 different ways. For a limited time, just $10.99.
It's delicious.
And it's only at Red Lobster.
I shampoo for dandruff, but my scalp still itches.
Now there's Scalpicin for deep scalp itch, not ordinary dandruff. It's clear liquid, not shampoo. With itch medicine, doctors chose over these dandruff shampoo formulas.
The itch is gone.
Scalpicin.
Nighttime, one of the worst times for pain.
minor arthritis pain, muscle aches, pain that seems to go on. That's why you need Ultra Strength Bengay. With more pain relievers than we've ever had, you can say goodnight to your pain with Ultra Strength Bengay.
I can't believe this incredible sense of lightness. I feel so light that I could float away. Could it be Stefan? Or new I can't believe it's not butter light. After all, it does have 1/3 fewer calories than butter, no cholesterol, and of course, great taste. It must be new I can't believe it's not butter light. I don't know anyone named Stefan.
Taste the light fantastic. New I can't believe it's not butter light.
During these latter weeks of the presidential election campaign, we have been devoting time on the American agenda to the issues and paying more attention to those which you make clear are the most important, which is why we're going to spend the rest of the week concentrating on where the candidates stand and what they stand for on the essential subject of education. We'll begin with K through 12. All three presidential candidates agree that the system is in urgent need of reform. They disagree on what the federal government's role should be. Our education reporter is Bill Blakemore.
For a brief moment 3 years ago, Bush and Clinton seemed each other's best ally in the battle to renew American schools.
Well done, Bill. Well done.
Congratulating each other at the first ever education summit with the nation's governors. President Bush convened it. Governor Clinton led in hammering out its reform goals. Since becoming governor in 1979, Clinton had pushed education as the key to improving life in Arkansas.
I care more about this than anything else. I think it is more important to the future of our state than anything else.
Governor Clinton has changed the general attitude and tone about education in Arkansas. He talked about education probably 365 days a year and pushed untold numbers of innovations.
His barrage of reforms required smaller classes, more advanced courses, made 8th graders pass a test on basics to get into high school. To help pay for all this, he got his legislature to agree to an unpopular sales tax. In return, he imposed new accountability, such as competency tests for teachers. Schools improved. Dropout rates fell dramatically. By the time of the summit, Clinton was regarded as one of the most effective education governors. George Bush first promised education reform in his '88 campaign.
I want to be the education president.
The summit, only 9 months into his term, set 6 goals for the year 2000. It was exactly the kind of leadership reformers wanted from the president.
This has been historic, and I pledge to you my determination to follow up in every way possible.
But then for 18 months, the White House produced no plan for achieving the goals. Responding to criticism of this lost momentum, Bush finally announced his reform plan in 1991. When you compare the Bush and Clinton plans, it's important to note they agree on some basics. Both want tough new standards of knowledge and a voluntary national testing system. Both want local schools and communities to have more freedom from central bureaucracies. But they differ on how to stimulate school reform. The Bush plan blames the education establishment for resisting reform and concentrates on trying to generate what it calls break-the-mold schools.
And each one of these schools would be a living example of how we can reinvent American education.
The plan has inspired school design teams around the country to compete for grants, and this has impressed reformers.
So all kinds of people that were sort of thinking about doing something about reform got themselves in gear, got acting, and so on.
But Clinton argues the Bush administration concentrates too much on future schools and fails to help existing schools with reforms that have been shown to work.
But I think we know what works, and we ought to be trying to improve all of our schools.
Clinton says he would work with the education establishment, which has endorsed him, to spread reform. And while state and local funds pay most of the education dollar, Clinton would raise the federal share from 6% to the 10% it was before 1980. Bush is proposing no increase in the percentage of federal money spent on schools, and this angers even some faithful Republicans.
We need more funding for Chapter 1, for example, which is education for the disadvantaged. And we need more funding for technology in education.
Ross Perot would cut federal education spending by about 15%, as he would all federal spending. Like Clinton, he believes the federal government should promote proven reforms. Like Clinton and Bush, he wants stronger national standards. But between the two leading candidates, the most dramatic disagreement is over how to give parents their choice of schools. We'll examine that tomorrow. Bill Blakemore, ABC News.
When we come back, the University of Arizona football team.
Lots of credit cards will give you a cash advance, but there could be a catch. Interest charges. Some credit cards charge them from day one, which is why you should use the Discover card. Pay your full monthly balance and a small transaction fee, and we'll give you a cash advance interest-free. How does that grab you? It pays to Discover.
3 years ago, when we introduced the Lexus LS400s, it was hailed as nearly perfect. Our engineers took that as a challenge.
Who are you going to call the most this month?
My grandparents in Philippines.
My uncle, Subramaniam, who lives in Agra, India.
With Sprint's new program, The Most, you automatically save 20% off whoever you call the most each month.
I call Wim in the Netherlands.
And with The Most, you can also choose a plan that lets you save 20% on international calls.
Mom in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
My sister in Munich.
My sister in Sri Lanka.
Doesn't anyone have relatives in Buffalo anymore?
Tonight on Nightline, Quayle, Gore, Stockdale. Who won and who lost the vice presidential debate? Results of an ABC News poll tonight.
Finally from us this evening, a story that may erode some of the male prejudices which have grown up around college football. It is about how so many of these young college stars, so much admired by so many on the weekends, get themselves up to the levels of strength and agility that they do. A look behind the scenes at the University of Arizona has proved educational. Here's ABC's Dick Schaap.
The University of Arizona has a strong football team, strong enough to upset undefeated UCLA a week ago. Touchdown! Strong enough to come within a point of upsetting undefeated Miami the previous week. One reason for the Wildcats' strength is their workouts in the weight room, designed to make them more agile, more mobile, more powerful. Another reason is the coach who organizes and oversees the workouts, the strength coach, Coach Ritchie.
Come on, you got it.
Margaret Ritchie.
Drive it through, yes. Good job.
Meg Ritchie is a 39-year-old Scot who once won the NCAA shot put and discus championships and twice represented Great Britain in the Olympics. She came to Arizona on a track scholarship more than a decade ago, knowing almost nothing about football.
I hadn't a clue what was going on. I knew something was happening, but I was never quite sure what.
Now she's on the sidelines for every game.
I wouldn't say I was an expert, because if you stuck me upstairs with the X's nose, I'd be flummoxed a little bit. The leg come all the way down, all the way down.
But Meg knows biceps and flexibility. She applied for and got her job 7 years ago.
The hook that got me to apply was there was no other woman doing this. That was the hook. That was the challenge.
Some players are startled to learn Arizona has a woman head strength coach, the only one with a major college team.
You were a wee bit tentative with them.
I sort of, thought a little bit, and I said, a woman? Well, when I got here and I saw her, she's not, your measly type size woman either.
At 180 pounds, 60 below her competitive weight, but she can still bench press 250 pounds.
She's a lot stronger than 3/4 of the football team, so no one really messed with Meg, so.
Are you sorry that you never had a chance to play football?
I would have really, I've said this to several people, and they look at me like I'm crazy, but I would have loved to have had a go at playing linebacker.
She would have been a tough one. Dick Schaap, ABC News, Tucson.
Okay, that's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. The vice presidential debate is next. Hope you'll stay with us. Good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
on the happy island of Jantique.
Cool. I don't want to be cool.
Love is in the air.
You ever been to a restaurant?
Stand up, bend over, and pull down your pants.
Dr. Davis.
Going to extremes.
Come back here.
Tonight on ABC.
When somebody get a hacksaw and cut this stupid handcuff from up this pervert.
From News Channel 5, Cleveland's live 24-hour news source continues.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wilma Smith. Here's the latest news. For only the fourth time in history, Americans will see a debate between the vice presidential candidates. The three square off next right here on News Channel 5. Libertarian vice presidential candidate Nancy Lord is going to protest the debate because she wasn't invited. The commission holding the debate says...
How much of a defense cut is safe? What happens to the people who are forced to leave the military services, or if they lose their jobs because they're working in defense industries? I think we start with Senator Gore this time.
Bill Clinton and I support a strong national defense. He and I have both fought for change within the Democratic Party as well as within the country. In the aftermath of the Cold War, the definition of strong national defense has obviously changed somewhat. For example, George Bush wants to maintain at least 150,000 American soldiers in Europe, even though World War II ended 50 years ago. Bill Clinton and I agree with so many military experts who believe that it is time for the Europeans, who are so much wealthier now and more powerful than they were at the end of World War II, to start picking up a little more of that tab themselves and not rely so exclusively on the United States taxpayers for the defense of Europe. We believe that we can make savings in our defense budget and at the same time improve our national security. Now, for those who are affected by the cutbacks, whether they come from George Bush or Bill Clinton and me, the difference is Bill Clinton and I have a defense conversion program so that those who won the Cold War will not be left out in the cold. We want to put them to work, building an infrastructure and an economy here in this country for the 90s and the next century.
Vice President Quayle.
We won the Cold War because we invested in national security. We won the Cold War because we invested in our military. We didn't win we won the Cold War because America had the political will and made the right decisions. Yes, we can make the cuts in defense, and we have. Bill Clinton wants to cut the defense another $60 billion. I'd say to the defense workers in California and elsewhere, $60 billion defense cut is going to cut a lot of jobs out. Yes, we are making a conversion. We can go to a civil space rather than having a defense or the defense industry. But let me say this. We would not have won the Cold War if we had listened to Senator Gore and his crowd and had supported a nuclear freeze. If you would have supported that attitude, we would not have won the Cold War. We won the Cold War because we invested and we went forward.
Okay. Admiral Stockdale,
yes,
please.
Thank you. The numbers in terms of the dollar cuts as they stand on our plans now show us almost the same as the Vice President's. But we note that Governor Clinton's plan is almost twice as much a cut as either one of us. I've been through the end of World War II and the surprise beginning of Korea to see how it cost us more money because we overcut the defense budget in the first place. I don't say that. So I think that should be eyed with great suspicion. People that are really kicking the props out from under our grand military establishment prematurely. Now, there's other differences between the Perot approach and what we see up here on either side of me, and that has to do with we want to focus our interests, economic and military, more to the Pacific. We figure that we are generally going along with any sort of a troop removal from Europe. So that's still another face of this puzzle.
Okay, Senator Gore, would you like to start the discussion period on this
topic? Yeah, I'd like to respond first to you, Admiral Stockdale. Under the details of our 5-year budget plan, we do propose more in defense cuts than George Bush and Dan Quayle, but only 5% more. Admiral Crow, who I think was one of your classmates in Annapolis, has endorsed the military portions of our plan, even though he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under George Bush, and John White has endorsed the economic aspects of our plan, even though I believe he was the architect of Ross Perot's economic plan. Now, when I heard George Bush say at the convention in Houston that when he heard the phrase, "we won the Cold War," it made him wonder who the "we" was. Well, I want to tell you, President Bush, the "we" is the people of the United States of America. This wasn't a partisan victory that came suddenly a few months after you took the oath of office. This started with Harry Truman, and it was a bipartisan effort from the very beginning. George Bush taking credit for the Berlin Wall coming down is like the rooster taking credit for the sunrise. Now, and I want to add one other thing, because in the debate a few nights ago, I think President Bush made a very serious misstatement of fact in response to Ross Perot. It was a kind of a little lecture he gave to Ross Perot when he said, "Those SS-18s are gone, Ross. That's done." He reached a deal with Boris Yeltsin to completely remove them so we can all sleep safely without any fear tonight. But you know what? They thought they were going to get that deal, but when he took the person in charge of the negotiations out of the State Department and put him in charge of the re-election campaign, the deal unraveled, and now there is no START II deal at all. In fact, there are serious problems. Isn't it a fact, Dan, that every single one of those SS-18s is still there in the silos, and under the START I treaty, only half of the silos are supposed to be dismantled, and there is no deal to get rid of the other half. Didn't the President make a mistake there?
Vice President Quayle,
the President does have a commitment from Boris Yeltsin to eliminate the SS-18s. That is a commitment.
Is it an agreement?
It is a commitment, and we're going
to.
Well, let's talk about.
Well, he said it's done.
Let him talk, Senator.
Let's lighten up here, Al.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about getting agreements. You know, the President of the United States doesn't just negotiate with your friends in Congress. The President of the United States deals on the international scene. He's got to deal with the President of Russia. He's got to deal with the Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister of Britain, President of France, Prime Minister of Japan. He's got to deal with a whole host of leaders around the world. And the leaders sit down and they will negotiate and they will come to agreements with people that they trust. And this is a fundamental problem with Bill Clinton, is trust and character. It is not the issue of how he avoided military service 20-some years ago. It's the fact. It's the fact that he does not tell the truth about it. He first said he didn't get an induction notice, then we find out that he did. He said he didn't have an ROTC slot, then we find out he did. He said he didn't use Senator Fulbright's office for special influence, then we find out that he did. These are inconsistencies. Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth, and he will have a very difficult time dealing with somebody like President Yeltsin or Chancellor Kohl or Prime Minister Major or President Mitterrand, because truth and integrity are prerequisites to being President of the United States.
I want to respond to that. George Bush, in case you've forgotten, Dan, said, "Read my lips. No new taxes."
Read my lips.
And you know what?
I didn't think I was going to hear that tonight.
Hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
He also said he wanted to be the environmental president. Then he went on to say he wanted to be the education president. Then he said that he wouldn't raise taxes again. No, never, ever, ever. Then the next day, his spokesman, Marlin Fitzwater, came out and said, "That's not a pledge." Then 2 weeks ago, he said that after the election, if you win, then James Baker's going to go back to be Secretary of State. Then a week later, in the debate a few nights ago, he said, no, after the election, if we win, James Baker is going to be in charge of domestic policy. Which is it, Dan? Is he going to What's your role in this going to be?
Well, we'll have to move on to another topic. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. No,
I don't have time to respond to that.
You'll get plenty of chance to respond, so don't worry.
I was okay. You're the moderator. I was under the assumption that when they like that,
we ran out of time according to the agreement. It's time to move on, and I want to stick to the agreement.
Word on that, but we'll come back to it.
But you'll have a chance. I can see what's happening here. We throw out the topic, and then we drift, but that's okay, because I think it's making for a healthy exchange. The only thing I would ask...
I'm enjoying it.
The only thing I would ask of you gentlemen is when we get to the discussion period, whoever talks first, be considerate of the others, because you have a tendency to filibuster. Okay, let's go on.
Look over there.
Okay. I'm not pointing any fingers. Let's talk about the environment. We'll get away from controversy. Everyone wants a safe and clean environment. But there's an ongoing conflict between environmental protection and the need for economic growth and jobs. So the point I throw out on the table is, how do you resolve this conflict between protection of the environment and growth and jobs? And why has it taken so long to deal with basic problems such as toxic waste dumps, clean air, and clean water? And Vice President Quayle, it's your turn to start first.
Hal, that's a false choice. You don't have to have a choice between the environment and jobs. You can have both. Look at the President's record. Clean air legislation passed the Democratic Congress because of the leadership of George Bush. It is the most comprehensive Clean Air Act in our history. We are firmly behind preserving our environment, and we have a good record with which to stand. The question comes about what is going to be their position when it comes to the environment. I say it's a false choice. You ought to ask somebody in Michigan, a UAW worker in Michigan, if they're thinking increasing the CAFE standards, the fuel economy standards to 45 miles a gallon is a good idea. 300,000 people out of work. You ought to talk to the timber people in the Northwest, where they say that, well, we can only save the oil, forget about jobs. You ought to talk to the coal miners. They're talking about putting a coal tax on. They're talking a tax on utilities, a tax on gasoline, home heating oil, all sorts of taxes. No, Hal, choice isn't the environment and jobs. With the right policies, prudent policies, we can have both.
Admiral Stockdale.
I read Senator Gore's book about environment, and I don't see how he could possibly pay for his proposals in today's economic climate. The Marshall Plan of Environment and so forth. And also, I'm told by some experts that the things that he fears most may not be all that dangerous, according to some scientists. You can overdo, I'm told, environmental cleaning up. If you purify the pond, the water lilies die. I love this planet, and I want it to stay here, but I don't like to have it the private property of fanatics that want to overdo this thing.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton and I believe we can create millions of new jobs by leading the environmental revolution instead of dragging our feet and bringing up the rear. You know, Japan and Germany are both openly proclaiming to the world now that the biggest new market in the history of world business is the market for the new products and technologies that foster economic progress without environmental destruction. Why is the Japanese business organization, the largest one they have, the Keidan-Ren, arguing for tougher environmental standards than those embodied in U.S. law? Why is MITI, their trade organization, calling on all Japanese corporations everywhere in the world to exceed by as much as possible the environmental standards of every country in which they're operating? Well, maybe they're just dumb about business competition, but maybe they know something that George Bush and Dan Quayle don't know, that the future will call for greater efficiency and greater environmental efficiency. This is an issue that touches my basic values. I'm taught in my religious tradition that we are given dominion over the earth, but we're required to be good stewards of the earth, and that means to take care of it. We're not doing that now under the Bush-Quayle policies. They have gutted the Clean Air Act. They have broken his pledge to be the environmental president. Bill Clinton and I will change that.
Okay, discussion period now. Again, leave time for each other, please. Vice President Quayle, go ahead.
Well, I'm tempted to yield to Admiral Stockdale on this. But the fact of the matter is that one of the proposals that Senator Gore has suggested is to have the taxpayers of America spend $100 billion a year on environmental projects in foreign countries.
Just not
foreign
true.
aid. Well,
Just
Senator,
not true.
it's in your book on
It's
page
not.
304.
No, it's not.
It is
No, it's
there.
not.
It is
No,
in
it's
your
not.
book. You know, Hal, I wanted to bring the Gore book tonight because I figured he was going to pull a Bill Clinton on me, and he has, because he's going to disavow what's in his book. It's in your book.
No.
It comes out to $100 billion of foreign aid for environmental projects.
All right, let's give him
now,
a chance to answer.
How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for an extra $100 billion of the taxpayers' money for this?
Dan, I appreciate you reading my book very much, but you've got it wrong.
No, I've got it right.
There's no such proposal. There is no such...
Okay, well, we'll find
Let him talk, Mr. Vice President. Let the Senator talk. Go ahead.
There is no such proposal. What I have called upon is a cooperative effort by the United States and Europe and Asia to work together in opening up new markets throughout the world for the new technologies that are necessary in order to reconcile the imperatives of economic progress with the imperatives of environmental protection. Take Mexico City for an example. They are shutting down factories right now, not because of their economy, but because they're choking to death on the air pollution. They're banning automobiles some days of the week. Now, what they want is not new laser-guided missile systems. What they want are new engines and new factories and new products that don't pollute the air and the water, but nevertheless allow them to have a decent standard of living for their people. Last year, 35% of our exports went to developing countries, countries where the population is expanding worldwide by as much as 1 billion people every 10 years. We cannot stick our heads in the sand and pretend that we don't face a global environmental crisis, nor should we assume that it's going to cost jobs. Quite the contrary. We are going to be able to create jobs, as Japan and Germany are planning to do right now, if we have the guts to lead. Now, earlier we heard about the auto industry and the timber industry. There have been 250,000 jobs lost in the automobile industry during the Reagan-Bush-Quayle years. There have been tens of thousands of jobs lost in the timber industry. What they like to do is to point the finger of blame with one hand and hand out pink slips with the other hand. They've done a poor job both with the economy and the environment. It's time for a change.
Admiral Stockdale, did you have something you wanted to say here?
I know that I read where Senator Gore's mentor had disagreed with some of the scientific data that is in his book. How do you respond to those criticisms of that sort? Do you
deny it?
Do you take this into account?
Let me respond. Thank you, Admiral, for saying that. You're talking about Roger Revelle. His family wrote a lengthy letter saying how terribly he had been misquoted and had his remarks taken completely out of context just before he died. He believed up until the day he died. No, it's true. He died last year. Please. And just before he died, he co-authored an article which had statements taken completely out of context. In fact, the vast majority of the world's scientists, and they have worked on this extensively, believe that we must have an effort to face up to the problems we face with the environment. And if we just stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it's not real, we're not doing ourselves a favor. Even worse than that, we're telling our children and all future generations that we weren't willing to face up to this obligation. I believe that we have a mandate to try to solve this problem, particularly when we can do it while we create jobs in the process.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President. There's still time.
Yep.
Not much.
I know it. We got to have a little equal time here now, Hal. In the book, you also suggest taxes on gasoline, taxes on utilities, taxes on carbon, taxes on timber. There's a whole host of taxes, and I don't believe raising taxes is the way to solve our environmental problems. And you talk about the bad situation in the auto industry. You seem to say that the answer is, well, I'll just make it that much worse by increasing the CAFE standards. Yes, the auto industry is hurting. It's been hurting for a long time. And increasing the CAFE standards to 45 miles per gallon, like you and Bill Clinton are suggesting, will put, as I said, 300,000 people out of work.
Okay, let's move on now. I would like to remind the audience of one thing. Trying to stop you from applauding may be a lost cause. I didn't say anything about hissing, but I do think it is discourteous. And there's no call for that, and it reflects badly on the candidate you're supporting. So let's knock that off. Let's go on to health care. Health care protection has become a necessity of life in our society. Yet, millions of Americans are not insured, and the cost of medical treatment is practically out of control. How do you propose to control these costs, and how are you going to provide access to health care for every American? Let's see, whose turn is it to go now? I think it's Admiral Stockdale's turn to go first. Go ahead.
Well, we have excellent technical health care, but we don't administer it very well. And the escalating costs top any other budget danger in on the horizon, I think. And what Mr. Perot has suggested is that we try to look at the incentives that are in our current way of doing business are what are killing us. There's no incentive for a hypochondriac not to go to Medicare every day. There is no incentive for a doctor to curtail the expensive tests because he's under threat of malpractice lawyers. And so we just have a web of wrong way incentives that has to be changed by some people who are in the medical profession and some other crafty people who know how to write contracts to change incentives or get the incentives situation under control.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton and I believe that if a criminal has the right to a lawyer, every American family ought to have the right to see a doctor of their own choosing when they need to see a doctor. There are almost 40 million Americans who work full-time today and yet have no health insurance whatsoever. We are proposing to change that, not with a government-run plan, not with new taxes, but with a new approach called managed competition. We are going to provide a standard health insurance package provided by private insurance companies and eliminate the duplication and red tape and overlap, and we're going to have cost controls to eliminate the unnecessary procedures that are costing so much money today. There was a bipartisan commission, evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats, who looked at our plan and the Bush-Quayle proposal. They said ours will save tens of billions of dollars and cover every American. The Bush proposal, by contrast, will cost us tens of billions and still leave Americans uninsured. But what I want to know is, why has George Bush waited for 3.5 years during this health insurance crisis before finally coming out with a proposal just before the election, and he still hasn't introduced it in Congress? Why the long wait, Dan?
Mr. Vice President?
Al, President Bush has had his health care reform agenda on the Capitol Hill for 8 months. He's had parts of it up there for years. You talk about increasing costs that the President has had on Capitol Hill, medical malpractice reform legislation for several years. Defensive medicine and health care today costs $20.7 billion. Defensive medicine defined as testing and treatment that is only necessary in case of a lawsuit. Wouldn't that be nice to take $20.7 billion that we're putting into our legal system and put it to preventive health care or women's health care or something else besides trial lawyers. But no, you don't want to reform the health care system to drive down costs through medical malpractice. What you're doing, you are talking about a government program. Your program is to ration health care. You said in your statement to see a doctor when you want to see a doctor. When you start rationing health care, there's going to be a waiting line to see a doctor unless it's an emergency. Remember when we rationed energy in this country? Waiting lines at the gasoline stations. The same thing would happen when you ration health care. The President's proposal deals with tax credits, deductions, and purchasing health care in the private sector and making health care affordable and available to every single American.
Admiral Stockdale, would you like to start the discussion period?
Well, I'm out of ammunition on this.
Well, let me talk then, because I've got a couple of things that I want to say. We still didn't get an answer to the question of why George Bush waited for 3.5 years during the national health insurance crisis before he even made a proposal. And it still hasn't been submitted to Congress in the form of legislation. I also want to respond to the question about malpractice. Do you know which state has the lowest malpractice premiums in the entire country? Bill Clinton's Arkansas does. Partly because he has passed reform measures limiting the time during which malpractice suits can be filed. In fact, tort claims generally have fallen 10% under Bill Clinton there. But you know, that's not the reason for this health insurance crisis. The reason is we've had absolutely no leadership. Let me tell you about a friend of mine named Mitch Philpott from Marietta, Georgia, not far from here, who Tipper and I met with his family in Johns Hopkins Hospital. Their son Brett was in the bed next to our son, and they couldn't pay their medical bills. They used to live in Atlanta, but they lost their house. And while they were there, both Mitch and his wife lost their jobs because they could not get unpaid leave. We passed legislation to give family leave under circumstances like that, exempting small business. How can you talk about family values, Dan, and twice veto the Family Medical Leave Act?
Vice President?
Pass our Family Leave Act, and because it goes to small businesses where the major problem is your proposal excluded small business. That's the problem. Now let me talk about health care.
Did you require it? Did you require it?
My turn.
Did you require family?
Lighten up, Al. My turn.
It's a free discussion.
Take a breath, Al. Inhale.
It's a free discussion. Did you require family leave in that legislation, yes or no?
We offered incentives to small businesses, yes or no? Were small business exempted under your proposal?
Yes.
Yes, and that's where the biggest problem is.
Did you require it of anyone?
I'm going to get back to the topic
Did you require it of
because
anyone?
He obviously doesn't want to talk about health insurance or health care, which you addressed. I was absolutely, I shouldn't say that. Another Clinton. You pulled another Clinton on me because here you go again. Medical malpractice legislation has been before the Congress of the United States, and you try to convince the American people that Bill Clinton is for tort reform. The biggest campaign contributors to your campaign are the trial lawyers of America. We have a letter, and we're going to release it again to the media if the media is interested, where the head of the trial lawyers of Arkansas said that Bill Clinton was basically in their back pocket, that Bill Clinton has always opposed tort reform of any kind. It's in the letter. We have it. We'll make it available because Bill Clinton is not for tort reform. I'd like to know where Bill Clinton stands on health insurance. When he's campaigning in New Hampshire, he says, I am for the pay-or-play health insurance. Pay or play, that's a 7 to 9% payroll tax on every worker in America that participates in this program.
Can I respond?
And then all of a sudden, this summer, he says, oh, I'm not for a pay or play. Here we go again. Bill Clinton, one day he's for pay or play, the next day he's against pay or play. He does it in education. He writes Polly Williams, a Democrat state legislator in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, saying, I'm for choice in education. Then he goes to the NEA Teachers Union and says, sorry, I'm not for choice in education because you won't let me be for choice in education. One time Bill Clinton says, term limits. We ought to limit terms. It's ridiculous that a member of Congress can serve for 30, 40, 50 years and you limit the terms of the president, but that's another subject.
We're fixing to limit one.
Yeah. We're going to limit. It's not going to be mine. It's going to be people like you and Kennedy and Metzenbaum and George Mitchell and the rest of that Democratic Congress on Capitol Hill. That's who we're talking about, and that's who the American people, in case, as you well know, you've got term limits for a president. You don't have term limits for Congress, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we don't.
I want to respond to some of this.
Here goes Bill Clinton again. He says, well, term limits, that's an interesting idea. I think I might be in favor of that. Then his Democratic friends in Congress say, no, Bill, you can't be for that. You know, Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth.
I want to respond to some of this.
Tell the truth.
I want to respond, if I might.
Go ahead, Senator, quickly.
You know, in response to my question before that long laundry list, he said that they had their own family leave proposal. It was just like the proposal of your party back when Social Security was first proposed. You said, we're for it as long as it's voluntary. Same with Medicare. You said, we're for it so long as it's voluntary. Civil rights, we're for it so long as it's voluntary.
Senator, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap this one up.
Family leave is important enough to be required.
Okay, thanks. Coming out of health care, again trying to avoid controversy, let's talk about the abortion debate. Abortion rights has been a bitter controversy in this country for almost 20 years. It's been heightened by the recent Supreme Court decisions. So I'll make it very simple in this question. Where do each of you stand on the issue? What action will your president's administration take on the abortion question? Will it be a factor in the appointment